All right. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. This is our Caregiver Wellness Day webinar. I'm Karen Huber with Home Instead Senior Care, and I would like to welcome you to our third Caregiver webinar. And we have a special treat for you today. We have two great speakers on hand, and they're going to share some wonderful information to help you there in the home as you care for your loved ones in the home. Abby Martin is the manager at the Family Caregiver Center of Mercy, and she's going to share what the Family Caregiver Center is involved in and what they do to help families. And she has a lot of helpful information. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn everything over to Abby right now and let her share what she has to offer for us. So Abby, would you take over for us?
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. I have a little PowerPoint for you guys today. Okay, so like Karen said, my name's Abby, and I'm a social worker, but also the manager at the Family Caregiver Center, and I'm very happy to be with you all today. I'm going to be talking about embracing the caregiver role, which I realized after deciding on this topic, this is a very broad topic. So here's my attempt at breaking it down, and I hope today you'll all take away something helpful. So first, I'm going to start by telling you all about my Grandma Sue, because without her, I wouldn't be in the career I am today, and I wouldn't be speaking to you today about caregiving. I also will give many personal examples throughout this presentation that I want to make sense. So here's a little bit about my story. So who is my grandma? She was a college graduate, she was a nurse, a mother of 5, a grandmother of 10, and a great-grandma of 5. She was a self-taught pianist, a chocoholic, a wonderful decorator, a woman of faith, and a strong advocate for any injustice. She was what I like to call spunky, and she was one of my favorite people. My grandparents lived just 1 hour away from us growing up, so my brothers and I were allowed to see them often. My grandma unfortunately started noticing signs of memory loss when she was in her late 50s while working as a nurse manager at the University of Iowa. She began forgetting small tasks and she was unable to concentrate. She ended up retiring early with my grandpa to do the things that they loved. So they traveled, they worked in Yellowstone for a while. They went to Texas every winter and spent a lot of time camping and hanging out with their grandchildren, which you can see some of the pictures here. My grandpa covered her memory loss for many years. Actually, most of her children didn't realize what was going on. It wasn't until her mid-60s that she started mixing up words more regularly that it became more obvious to us. She also experienced, unfortunately, some increased anxiety, stress, and paranoia, and she isolated herself from those activities that she once enjoyed, card clubs with friends, visiting with neighbors. While she was never fully tested for dementia, we knew the signs well because unfortunately her mother, my great-grandmother, had dementia and had been living with dementia about 10 years at that point as well. My grandma became less physically active and her health declined. And they moved from their 4-story home where they'd lived for 40 years in Washington, Iowa, to a mobile home in Marion to be closer to my parents and my family. In 2012, I had just graduated from college and was living in Omaha. And in May, my grandma had fallen and had a brain aneurysm. She spent a month in the hospital following rehab, but after that, she was a completely different person. It kind of had progressed the memory loss that she was experiencing. She was more repetitive, started having conversations with relatives who had passed, wandered outside trying to get home, would pack a bag every afternoon and start the car. Scary stuff. She started to have incontinence, would spend hours in the bathroom at night, and then started falling. And obviously this affected my grandpa, who was living with her. He had been a caregiver for many years, but started to need help. And this is when my family stepped in and I officially became a secondary caregiver. So who is a caregiver? In the US today, there are over 48 million unpaid caregivers providing assistance for someone over the age of 18. This has increased by 8 million in the past 5 years. That's close to 1 in 5 people. That's a lot. Typically, you see a caregiver as, well, this is what the typical caregiver is according to stats from the AARP's 2020 study. It's a 46-year-old woman who works outside the home and spends more than 20 hours per week caring for usually her mother. But a caregiver can be any age, race, gender, socioeconomic class. Most caregivers are caring for a relative. 50% are caring for a parent or a parent-in-law, 12% for a spouse. About 40% live with the person they're caring for, and spend about 24 hours per week providing that care. A large majority, 61%, are continuing to work while they provide care for someone. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And I think this is an interesting stat that 1 in 3 are caring for someone also living with dementia. So what is that caregiver role? So each of us holds many roles in our life. I'm a wife, recently married actually. I'm a daughter, a sister, a social worker, a volunteer. I hike, I bake, I craft. Each of these roles that we have brings various responsibilities, right? The caregiver role brings a variety of responsibilities. So you may be helping with any of these things that are listed on the screen here. Those day-to-day needs that we call ADLs, or activities of daily living, dressing, bathing. You might be getting groceries or housekeeping, helping to pay bills, or just calling to check in. Caregiving roles and demands are impacted by a variety of different factors too. So the type of chronic condition that someone has, your availability as a caregiver. Often people are juggling many responsibilities. That typical caregiver role we talked about is kind of a sandwich generation where people are having children later. So that person might also still be raising kids while trying to care for a loved one. The caregiver's location. Do you live in town, or are you long distance? Long distance is usually someone who's about an hour or more away, and their role might not be as much hands-on, but it doesn't mean that that person can't help with gathering information or coordinating services and putting together that team to help provide care. I think one that I tend to forget about is the urban versus rural settings. So I live in Cedar Rapids, but rural settings have fewer formal services available to help, which makes the caregiving role more challenging. So there's also different cultural approaches to caregiving and the expectations about caregivers' roles, and your role can also change based on your relationship. So for example, as a spouse, your role you may feel more comfortable with certain things such as physical care, where your adult child might not. So what does embracing mean? And embracing can mean a couple different things according to Webster's dictionary. There's embracing to hold someone closely in your arms as a sign of affection. But in this case, probably this definition is a little bit more relevant, which is to accept or support a belief, theory, or change willingly and enthusiastically. So the word that sticks out to me most in this definition is change. How many of us accept or support change willingly or enthusiastically? Some of you may have willingly became or embraced being a caregiver. However, I doubt many of us have faced or embraced every change as a result of caregiving enthusiastically. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to embrace the caregiver role and the journey that's here in front of you. So how do you embrace that caregiver role? I really like metaphors, and using visuals, they help me understand a little bit better. So today I think it might be helpful to think of the caregiving journey as a roller coaster. So let's pretend that we're first stepping onto that caregiving roller coaster. How do you feel? Are you like the lady in the front there? Are you feeling anxious? Maybe you're shocked by that diagnosis. You're uncertain or you're worried about what the future might hold. That the caregiving role can sneak up on us sometimes. One day you're going to a doctor's appointment, the next maybe you're managing more day-to-day kind of responsibilities. Other times we become caregivers after sudden change in health, resulting in more need for assistance. When we become caregivers, it's really important to recognize that is what we are. Without acknowledging that we're a caregiver, we are less likely to ask for help when it's needed. Sometimes we can be a little bit too close to the situation. We might not necessarily see the severity of what's going on, or feel the person might be more capable than what they are. I believe this is where my grandpa lived for many years. It's not that he didn't know what was happening, but he wasn't ready to acknowledge his sadness or fear for the future. The denial that he had, it was a coping mechanism, which slowly moved to acceptance as he became less overwhelmed when my family stepped in to help. So learning to ride that roller coaster. So you've accepted the role, you're on the roller coaster. Similar to a roller coaster in caregiving, there are many ups and downs. There's twists and turns. It's a journey that you're faced with constant change. So being a caregiver is really becoming an expert in dealing with change. So how do you do this? First is embracing it. Recognizing, that change is going to happen. Life isn't going to be the way that it was before, or things aren't necessarily going to be the way that you planned. Once you start expecting that things are going to change, you can use your energy to deal with it versus fighting with the fact that this happened to you or your loved one. The second thing is reminding yourself that you are experienced at dealing with change. You have been dealing with change and changes all of your life. You are an expert. You've gone through change in the past, and you can make it through this difficult time as well. The third thing is grieving and mourning the loss of what was. Change can bring on feelings of loss. We're going to talk a little bit more about grief a little later on. But one thing you can do is list out all the losses that you have faced as a result of this change in your life, and then take the time to grieve the losses of what was. One of the hardest days for me when I was caring for my grandma that I will never forget is I helped my grandma with some physical care needs, including showering. And there was one day when I was giving her a shower that I became Barb, the shower aide. And she asked me how many other old ladies I had to give showers to that day. And then she told me all about her wonderful granddaughter, Abby. Knowing that my grandmother no longer knew who I was a big loss to me. The fourth thing is acknowledging what is and what you still have. So in this case, you can list all of those things that you still have. So those are things that maybe you're grateful for, that brings your life meaning, that makes you smile. And then take a second to appreciate each thing and the person that you have listed. So going back to my example, looking back, I realized my grandma was confused and didn't recognize me in that caregiving role as a bath aide. That wasn't a role that she had ever remembered me playing in her life before. So what we still had was that she had fond memories of our relationship, and she was able to share those, and that brought me comfort. So 5, recalling from the past how other changes were managed. So remember other big changes that you have faced, reflect on those and what worked in the past, and use those experiences to help you move forward into the future. And the last thing is being persistent. It's going to take time. Don't give up. To manage change, you first must gain perspective and then start taking steps. So let's talk a little bit about some of the emotions that are faced during caregiving. So similar to the roller coaster idea, your emotions and how you feel about being a caregiver are going to change. Each emotion has their value and their place. You'll often find that these emotions will simply emerge in unexpected ways and unexpected times. So some common emotions that you may find or have found yourself experiencing: anger, irritability, resentment. Do you feel like you've lost it or you're on your last nerve? Maybe you feel like you are forced into this role, or you're not receiving the help from your family that you would like. Take a second when you're in this place to recognize what your triggers are, and learn to walk away. Take some calming breaths and give yourself a timeout, whatever that means for you. So maybe you need to take a cool drink or go outside. We each have our own way of doing that. Again, you might need a break. Try journaling or maybe talking to a close friend. Find someone that can listen to you as you vent about the things that happened to you that day. Also recognize that sometimes our reality can be different than our expectations. So we might expect our family members to be there to help, or that our care receiver would be able to help in some way. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. And the energy that you're spending dwelling on that is actually harmful to you. So try broadening your circle of people to include those who can and are able to help. Sometimes we might feel anxious, having lack of control and not knowing how to resume it. Listen to yourself when you're in that place. Feeling anxiety, those butterflies in your stomach, that's your body's early warning sign that something isn't right. So pay attention to figure out what's causing that for you. And if you can, take action to address it. And if this is something regularly that you face, I would definitely talk to your physician about that. Same thing with depression. Be especially mindful of this if you have a history of depression, because sometimes caregiving, going through a stressful situation can trigger that. So talk to your physician, maybe a therapist or a trusted friend. Exercise is also really proven to relieve some of the symptoms of depression. Loneliness is another thing you might face as a caregiver. The isolation is real. It's easy to lose a sense of yourself and the connection to family and friends. And I know my grandma and my grandpa both experienced that, as my grandma became less interested and able in participating in the things she did before. And as a result, my grandpa also faced the isolation that came with that. Feeling guilty, feeling like we did something wrong. Maybe feeling like you could have prevented someone from getting sick, or you're not doing enough as a caregiver. Unfortunately, we can't be perfect 24/7, and it's impossible to be in control of how you feel at all times. So tell yourself, give yourself a break. Tell yourself that you're in a difficult situation, and you're going to have to make difficult decisions with the information that you know at that moment. We are all human, and at the end of the day, we are doing the best that we can. And I think one of the biggest key emotions experienced in caregiving is the emotion of grief. I'm not sure if you guys were fortunate to hear the keynote speaker last year, Dr. Sarah Sanders. She also was one of my grad school professors and is a very smart individual. But she says the entire caregiving experience is one of grief. So we all recognize that loss occurs at the end of life. However, when you're caring for someone, you and that person experience loss after loss, starting with the diagnosis. So in my situation, my grandma, she lost her job, her ability to drive. They moved from their home of 40 years. Her ability to comprehend and be understood, and their hopes and dreams for the future. And my grandpa lost all of those things, including his life partner that he made decisions with. Learn to recognize those moments of grief and don't shy away from them, or feeling the sadness that comes with it. Allowing us to feel grief actually helps promote healing. And a way to do this is kind of creating a ritual symbolizing letting go. So maybe you light a candle, although probably not right now because of the burn ban. But think or say out loud those losses that you have and then blow out the candle. Or maybe write down the things the person can no longer do and then rip up that paper. That's kind of a way to help process some of those emotions. So caregiving can be challenging, but also rewarding. In my experience, there was a lot of joy intertwined with all of the other emotions. Laughter and humor is really what got us through. Dementia in some ways was almost a gift for my grandma. I know that's kind of weird to say, but my grandma had always lived a life of high anxiety and panic and stress. And as her dementia progressed, it kind of helped her forget about all those things that made her stressed out and really helped her to live in the moment. I'm going to put a plug in for a good book. So we've been working a lot with Judy Cornish, and she has a book called Dementia with Dignity. And it talks all about how to live in the present moment with the person living with dementia and how they can experience the world in a beautiful and different way. So if you want a good book, I would check that one out. So my grandma lived an adventurous life and she enjoyed it. And I have a story that kind of goes along with this picture here. So she told lots of stories because, and most of them weren't true, but she had a lot of fun and a lot of it had to do with things she was watching on TV that she related to her own life. So I'm thinking she must have been watching the whale riding movie or some kind of National Geographic show. But I called her one day and asked her how she was doing, and she told me she was exhausted. And then I asked why, and she said, well, I've been riding whales all day and they're really hard to steer. So that's just one of my favorite stories and one of many that we ended up writing down, and looking back just really make me smile. So, oops, too soon. Caregiving is truly a selfless gift that you can give to someone. My grandma actually ended up passing away following a stroke in 2015, but I don't regret a moment of the time that I spent caring for her. And although it was very hard, it brought us closer together as a family. So a way to cope with some of the emotions that you might experience. Pay attention. Check in with yourself daily. Wake up every day and ask yourself, how are you doing today? I think this is especially important in today's climate. I mean, we're dealing with COVID, the social isolation that comes with that, derecho cleanup, everything going on with politics and social unrest. And if you add caregiving to it, that's an awful lot. So really keep track of how you're feeling. Allow those emotions. It's okay not to be okay. Allowing yourself to recognize and feel your emotions can actually decrease them. Choose specific moments to simply sit with them, acknowledging that they're valid and that there's nothing wrong with you for feeling like this. The emotions are a part of your situation and it's a part of the human experience. Talk or write about it. So if you feel like you're not able to release those emotions, sometimes talking about it can be a healthy way to express them. So maybe, again, that's a close friend or family member. Maybe it's a caregiver support group or a therapist. And if you can't talk to someone about it, try writing. Writing can take those thoughts out of your head and put them onto the page where you can view your situation from a different perspective. It can be helpful to look back and reflect on what you've learned and how far you've come. Focus on the relationship. So sometimes we tend to get overwhelmed when we focus on all we have to do or what we have to do. And this is when it's helpful to shift our focus back on the relationship. So I have a story to go with that too. My grandparents were antique dealers. And they had shelves and cupboards and even their mobile home full of antiques. And one of my jobs was dusting. And if you're an antique person, you know that each antique comes with a story. So when I was cleaning, Instead of focusing on dusting, which I hated dusting, by the way, I focused on my relationship with my grandma. I would comment on the things that I was dusting, and my grandma would tell stories about the items. Sometimes they were true and sometimes they were made up, but they helped me focus on what was important, which was our relationship versus the task that I was doing. And then taking a break is very important too in coping with your emotions. We all need that time to refuel and recharge. And as a caregiver, it's especially important, which leads to my next point, which is learning to get off the roller coaster. And this is, learning to ask for help, but also recognizing what are your limits. So initially, my grandpa was fine with helping my grandmother, as she could take care of a lot of her own needs. But it wasn't until after her aneurysm that my grandma started to need more physical help, and my grandpa started wearing down. So this is an important question that I think all caregivers need to ask themselves. What is my limit? What am I willing or not willing to do? And when will I know that it's time to look for help? Taking care of yourself. So self-care, it's an important topic. It's something that we in caregiver support, healthcare talk about a lot. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you have self-awareness, and again, that you know your limits. When you're feeling stressed or exhausted, there's a higher chance that the person you're caring for or yourself could become sick or injured, which would not help anyone, right? So in my grandpa's situation, he was wearing down to the place where he was so exhausted that he would have ended up in the hospital. He never asked for help, but my family saw the need when my grandparents' appearance and the cleanliness of their home kind of changed. So my parents, my brothers, and I stepped in to talk about bringing in help. My grandma started going to Milestones Adult Day Center a couple of days a week. I also started providing respite care 2 to 3 days per week, allowing my grandpa that time to rest, to go to church, to spend time doing the things he loved, like golfing and antiquing. So you are giving of your own time and energy, and it's very important that your own needs continue to get met, because you can't fill from an empty cup. So what do you do? What can you do to refuel your tank? Maybe you go to bed at a reasonable time. You do meal preps on the weekends, so you have, more time at night to spend with your care receiver. You do small things throughout the day that you enjoy, so you have time to look forward to whatever it is that you like. We had a caregiver recently that did one of our talks we call Take Tens. She talked about her own experience and how she'd been feeling empty during this time. And she looked at her entire weekly schedule, looked at everything that she was doing and for how long. And she asked, what could she do to reduce something or change her schedule around to make room for time for herself? And she did that, and it's turned out to be a way that she's coped during this time. And in general, simplifying things. When things become stressful, it's very important and easy to simplify wherever possible. So maybe you're delegating some of those household responsibilities, bringing in paid care to help with those things, or family members. Maybe you find a store where you can make a one-stop shop instead of going to 3 different stores. And another important area is respite, taking a break. So, sorry, I keep losing never mind. So respite, taking a break. Respite can be short. It can be a couple hours or a day or overnight. It can be providers coming into the home or in a facility. Respite is important because it allows you time to do what you need to do while knowing your loved one is also in good hands. So again, my grandma went to Milestones, and it was such a lifesaver for my grandpa and my family. And it also provided her entertainment and meaningful engagement, which I think is very important too. So another big area that we talk a lot about at the Family Caregiver Center that I think is very important and helps relieve stress as a caregiver is developing a plan. or planning ahead. So planning ahead means that you'll have more time to make decisions, and it allows you to be proactive instead of reactive. So first, communication is key. Talk to your care receiver. What is their understanding of their diagnosis? How are they feeling? What are their wishes for the future? And then gather those important players and have a family meeting. Who wants to be involved? Who wants to be informed? Figure out who is in charge and who will be helping with assistance. Figure out who is willing to do what, and maybe figure out who cannot help. Sometimes we just have too much on our plate and it might not be feasible for everyone to help. I think this is important. Who will be the messenger to make sure that everyone's informed of what's going on? And again, discussing those limits. When will you know that the caregiver needs a break? What are the signs that the care receiver needs additional assistance? After you've had that meeting, start building your committee. So look at the needs that you currently have. What do you need today? And then also think about what you might need in the future. How can you meet some of those needs today and in the future by bringing in different types of support? So there's informal support, which could be friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, church members. Could they help with things like getting the mail or checking in every once in a while? And then there's the more formal support, which is the professionals and providers, the different care communities. This formal type of support can help with a variety of things as well, both in the home and in a facility. So another type of formal support is an attorney. Do you have an attorney or a financial planner, an accountant? Making sure that these people know each other can make your job easier, because with your permission, they can communicate with each other instead of having you to make multiple phone calls. And then start thinking about how you can make a schedule to help, again, make your life a little easier. So again, can someone help with housekeeping, coming into the home, milestones like I talked about that helped with my grandma, and learn about that future support. If you need home care, who would you use? If your loved one needed to go to an assisted living or a care center, where would they go? And if you can, start touring. I know that's a little difficult during this time with COVID, but I know some places are touring. Doing this earlier than later also allows them to be active your care receiver to be active participants in the decision making, which can make life a lot easier, knowing again that you're honoring their wishes. So are your affairs in order? Are your ducks in a row? Review finances. The cost of care can be expensive. Again, do you have a financial planner? Have you heard of long-term care insurance? Do you know how much care costs? If you know how much care costs, then you can learn about the different options available, if it's affordable to you, and then learning more about things that might help if you do get to the point where you need assistance, which may be Medicaid, and knowing when to apply. Have you done estate planning or advanced care planning? Have you met with an attorney to complete a variety of paperwork? Powers of attorney for healthcare, financial, a living will. Do you know if your person wants to be resuscitated? Their final will and testament. And then there's something called the Declaration for Final Disposition, because a lot of people don't know that the POA actually ends at the end of life. So that would be the person that would make decisions in regards to your remains. If you have completed this paperwork, sometimes there's another step, which is giving it to your doctor's office, the POAs, or going to the bank. Sometimes banks have another form that you would need to complete. And doing this earlier than later is helpful, because if the person you're caring for has dementia, they might not be able to speak their choices in the future. Funeral and burial planning. Have you prepaid for any of those things? Do you know what your person wants? And then legacy building, leaving a legacy. How do you want to be remembered? My grandpa did something that was very sweet. The last year of my grandma's life, she was a baker and loved baking, and he wrote down all of her recipes for all 10 of us grandchildren. And I just thought it was the coolest thing and a great way to really remember her. So another thing you can do is just starting to think about contingencies. So all of those things that might be what ifs. So if the caregiver needs a break, then this. If the caregiver is hospitalized for a period, then who would step in to help or provide assistance? Again, if the care receiver needed more assistance, then what would you do? And I think another very important thing is deciding on a successor caregiver. So if something happened to you as a caregiver, who would step in to take care of your care receiver? This is very important, especially in the age of COVID, because you never know what might happen to you. Once you've decided on who that person might be, make sure to talk to them to make sure that they're willing and able to do that. And also so they know what your plans are and keep them updated if there's any changes. Having a written plan can be really helpful too. So as I said earlier, I'm the manager of the Family Caregiver Center, and I'm coming up on 2 years. I think we're so fortunate to live in a community with wonderful resources and providers that are assisting family caregivers. And the Family Caregiver Center is one of those that I'd like to tell you a little bit more about here. So we will be celebrating actually our 5-year anniversary in December, which is pretty great. In that time, we've met with over 1,250 caregivers. That's just a one-time count. It doesn't account for when they come back. So the main goal of the Caregiver Center is to relieve the stress and burden for family members caring for an adult living with a chronic condition. And we do that by offering support, education, and connection to resources. We are a community resource, which means that we're open to all, regardless of where you go for your medical care. We're volunteer-led and run. I know many of you know Kathy Good or know of her. And we have 2 paid employees, which is myself and our office coordinator, Kathy Craffle. We have over 100 volunteers that assist with a variety of roles, and the majority of caregiving experience like myself and the Kathys. So we personally know the stress, the grief, the guilt, the struggle that you go through, and it makes it easier for us to relate, I think. We know that caregiving will never be easy, but our goal is to hopefully make it easier, and we do that in a variety of different ways. So we meet one-on-one with caregivers, with a trained volunteer or staff member discussing each person's individual situation. I will say, unfortunately, some of the things we're doing have changed due to COVID, but that's the one thing we are doing in person is we are meeting one-on-one with caregivers if they are interested. We have different support groups. So we have a call-in support group for both genders. We have a group specifically for men called the Male Caregiver Coffee that meets every week. We offer a book study in the spring called the Mindful Caregiver, and that's followed by an ongoing support group. We have a 4-week series for caregivers whose loved one has died, and that's also followed by an ongoing support group. We have art, music, and chair yoga. Unfortunately, again, with COVID, we haven't been able to do art, but we've had something we called Music with Friends. That's a virtual sing-along, and we have resumed chair yoga weekly in September. We hold a variety of Q&A sessions quarterly with the VA and about Medicaid with DHS and Iowa Legal Aid. And then just a lot of different education sessions. So we started doing something called Take 10s. They're 10-minute tips for caregivers. We record them and we put them on YouTube so they're accessible. Iowa State Extension and Outreach, we were talking before we joined. Karen just led a session with them called Powerful Tools. That's all about taking care of yourself as a caregiver. There's also finances for caregiving that Iowa State Extension and Outreach also runs. The Lynn County Triad is going to be talking at the end of the month about assistive devices. And another thing, we've talked a lot today about planning. We recently created something we're calling the Comprehensive Planning Guide. It's a large document, 150 pages. It's a place to help record your important information and plan for the future in the event something happens to you as a caregiver. And we have an upcoming session in November if people are interested. We also have a resource lending library. So I talked about a couple things that have changed during COVID. Another thing, unfortunately, we're not able to offer right now that we were is our companion respite program. So we did have volunteers going out into homes to give caregivers a break. That's just on hold with safety concerns. But we're always happy to meet with caregivers to talk about other respite options. So I wanted to put this in here as an opportunity for you guys to save the date if you're interested. So Thursday, November 5th at noon, we have a Take 10 with Dr. Myers. And for those that don't know who he is, Dr. Tony Myers has kind of been Mercy's representative during COVID, talking about safety, how the hospital is reacting, all of that stuff. But he's going to talk about holiday celebrations and COVID-19. So if you have concerns about the holidays and want to join in on that, all of these sessions are via Zoom, and we can get you the link to join. We'll also be recording it so you can watch it later. And then I mentioned our 5-year celebration, our anniversary coming up. We are going to have an event, virtual event on December 10th from 5:30 to 7. And we're going to be joined by the author I mentioned earlier, Judy Cornish, who will be sharing about the gifts of dementia. So each month we put out a calendar of events and a newsletter. So if you want to be on our mailing list or want to learn more, you can give us a call. I have the number listed here, or you can email us at the FCGC email. So in conclusion, thank you guys for spending time with me today and listening to some of my stories. I'm hoping that you learned something new or reminded of something that can help you in your caregiving journey. So that is all that I have. Are there any questions?
Abby, you did a great job. And right now there are not any questions in the mark. So we're good. I don't have any in the chat room, so you're good to go. Great job, though. Great information on the Family Caregiver Center. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, though. Pam Railsback is going to share information on long-term care, and she is our long-term care ombudsman. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Pam and have her give her information on long-term care. Thank you, Pam.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Abby, too. You did a wonderful job. I'm going to be partnering, kind of piggybacking on a lot of what she said and maybe going into more details. But yeah, the Family Caregiver Center, oh, they're amazing. I appreciate all the good work that you guys do. So as far as being a caregiver, looking at long-term care at some point might be a situation that's in your future, and who knows, you know, we never know, but having information about that just in case you'd ever need it, we thought might be helpful. So put together a couple slides for you. So first off, I'll tell you about myself. Again, I'm Pam Railsback. I'm with the Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and nobody knows what the word ombudsman means. It's just a fancy word for advocate. So really nuts and bolts of what I get to do is investigate and resolve concerns to the satisfaction of residents and tenants who are living in long-term care settings. So I get to fight for what their rights are, what their wishes are, and try to achieve, resolve concerns on their behalf. And it's super rewarding, you know, going out to the facilities and getting to meet people and hear their stories, and, you know, talking to a lot of caregivers right now, especially what I've been doing since we've kind of been grounded from going into facilities due to the lockdown with COVID. So it's been a different world, but, you know, we've all been kind of rolling with it, right? So a little bit about our office real quick. All calls are confidential and services are free to everyone. Our office staff are paid through state and federal funds. So no cost to anybody who calls, and everything's confidential unless we get permission to share details about what we're talking about, or in order to resolve a concern on someone's behalf, I would have to seek permission to make sure that would be okay with the person I'm working with. We do also provide assistance with an involuntary discharge process, and that might be if maybe you're at an assisted living or a nursing home setting and you get a letter asking you to leave within 30 days, or sometimes there's emergency letters that say you need to leave immediately, in which case usually you go to the hospital. But we get involved in those. We're required to receive copies of those letters so that we reach out to the caregiver and let you know what your rights are. There are appeal rights, and we can involve legal aid, and there's all kinds of options with that too. Some help that I can extend. We also work with facilities for changing policies in order to better the stay for the residents, work with resident and family council groups, and of course, uphold resident rights and quality of care. We do lots of information assistance, people that just call and say, oh my gosh, I have questions about long-term care. I don't know who to call. I'm a good first call. If I don't have the information, I'll certainly pass you on to somebody who does. So that's a little bit about my office. So I'm going to talk quickly about when to explore long-term care options. And I think Abby mentioned too, in a perfect world, if you could have a conversation with your care receiver about what would your wishes look like if you needed to go into long-term care. Do you have a preference? If you could have some conversations ahead of time to maybe just put together a plan or get an idea in your head on what that might look like, just in case, because we never know, that just kind of helps to when you go through the process. And of course, as Abby mentioned, pre-COVID, touring around to a facility and looking around to see what you like, what you don't like. I always used to encourage, hey, talk to a couple residents, the people that live there. Who else would know better about what's going on besides the person that lives there? So right now, because of COVID, I know that that's not necessarily an option everywhere, but feel free to ask for a virtual tour. I've talked to a couple social workers, and sometimes they have something online, or they can walk around like with an iPad or something like that through Skype or FaceTime or whatever platform you want to use. So there might be some workarounds there too. So don't be afraid to ask. So I'm going to just highlight two different long-term care options today, and those would be assisted living programs and nursing facilities. So I'll start with assisted living, and you probably notice a lot of assisted livings are popping up all over, and the definition of assisted living is pretty much just housing with services. So services are very specific to each assisted living. They might include health-related care, personal care, meals, activities, assistance with ADLs, which is activities of daily living. Assisted livings were created to promote independence, quality of life, and freedom to make decisions and just guide your own care. Just FYI, assisted living programs are certified by the state inspectors, and they're required to have at least a visit once every 2 years. There's no federal rules for oversight for assisted living. They're completely just kind of overseen by the state regulatory department, which is Department of Inspections and Appeals. And they're different from my office. They're regulatory, we're advocates. So there is a difference with that too. Some assisted living programs have dementia specific services, so feel free to ask about that when you're checking around in case that's a need. And many assisted livings accept private pay only, so you might want to certainly ask about the payment options and things like that, which I'll get into more as we go on. Some assisted livings accept Medicaid, a Medicaid program called the Elderly Waiver, and it's always a good idea when you're seeking assisted living to ask about payment requirements. So if somebody exhausts their funds, would they be able to stay at this particular assisted living if they were able to get Medicaid? And the answer might vary depending on the place. Sometimes places say after 2 years of private pay, well, you can stay here on the elderly waiver. So each place is different. So please feel free to ask ahead of time just so you can have a plan in place. And I think we mentioned long-term care insurance policies, and those might include assisted living depending on your policy. So feel free to check into that. Here's a quick overview of general services in an assisted living. A minimum of 1 meal per day, recreational activities, minimal medication management, minimal assistance with activities such as dressing and bathing. Services are usually provided in an apartment-like setting, and there are typically common areas for dining and for activities. And 24-hour response staff is required. They might be able to be on site only, which means maybe for an assisted living that's connected to a nursing home. The assisted living overnight staff perhaps might be over at the nursing home area, and that's okay, just as long as, you know, they're making routine checks and able to respond to any call lights or needs in the assisted living. It's important to note too that assisted living programs might just be a temporary placement depending on your care receiver's needs and what those are. If someone's care would increase and they would need more assistance than what an assisted living could provide, there may be a point in time when your loved one exceeds assisted living level and may need to move on to like a nursing home setting. So this is information I just took from the rules in Iowa, and this is kind of gives you a guideline at least as far as what assisted livings can or cannot handle. The rules do not allow for assisted livings to continue to serve someone who's bedbound or might require a routine 2-person assistance with transfers. If they're dangerous or to themselves or other tenants, maybe they've got some elopement concerns, or if they're physically abusive to others, would be another reason. Assisted livings cannot handle someone who might be in acute state of alcoholism, drug addiction, or uncontrolled mental illness. Residents just need to be over the age of 18. For folks that require more than part-time or intermittent health care, that might be when someone would exceed assisted living, or if someone has unmanageable incontinence, even despite an individualized toileting program, that might be a reason for someone to need a higher level of care. Someone who might be medically unstable, requires maximum assistance with activities of daily living, or might have, despite interventions, chronically urinate or defecate in places that are not considered socially acceptable. So I wanted to just make sure that everybody was aware that there are some limits for assisted living. They're great for people that don't need a whole lot of care, but there are certain situations per the regulations that they cannot handle. So feel free to talk to your assisted living. Every assisted living kind of has their own threshold too. So, or maybe more reasons that they have put into place or in their contracts that don't allow for them to keep people longer than what the rules allow. So payment methods would include private pay, money from a sale of a home, annuities, pensions, Social Security, those kinds of things. Any income or assets would be included in private pay. Elderly waiver program is a Medicaid program, and you just have to be 65 and older. You do have to have an income requirement and an asset level in order to qualify. You do need to have your doctor complete a level of care certification form to see if you qualify. And there's an online way that you can apply for Medicaid. And this is the portal through Department of Human Services website. I know Harrison is going to put this presentation on the Heritage's website. So feel free to check back and look at that website later if you need it. So here are just the top questions to ask if you're considering assisted living. And this is just enough to get your brain going and get you thinking on percolating on what other questions you might need to ask. So obviously, what are your needs? How much will it cost? Location is important because you want to make sure it's close to doctors or doctor's appointments or family members and friends. What kind of activities or amenities are available? How's the healthcare delivered? Sometimes assisted living, they have their own staff that they've hired that provide the care. Some assisted livings contract with home health agencies. And in those cases, maybe asking if you could hire your own home health agency. Maybe you've worked with someone at home and you'd like to continue with them. So that might be a good question to ask too. And what differentiates this facility from the others? What rights do I retain when I move in? And it also might be helpful to see a copy of the occupancy agreement, just to make sure you fully understand what the charges look like, what the services would look like. That will be provided as well. So our website, we have a very comprehensive, like multiple page document, like more questions than you ever would have even thought of asking. So if you'd like to go check that out, here is the website for that and the link for that. I'm sure that you will not be asking all of these questions, but at least it'll give you a starting point. You can kind of vet through and cross out the ones that you think you won't be using, but it's a good starting point. So next I'm going to talk quickly about nursing facilities, and those are more often referred to as nursing homes, but they are designed to meet the needs of folks who need a higher level than assisted living. Services they would provide around the clock nursing care, meals and snacks, licensed and certified nursing staff, recreational activities, social services, dietary, housekeeping, laundry, maintenance, and therapy. So they're the whole kit and caboodle. Again, if you can tour, that would be awesome. I think that's the #1 way to kind of vet facilities when you're looking around. During COVID, maybe a virtual tour might be an option. Asking if they have like a dementia unit, like a locked unit for folks with dementia in case a wandering is a concern might be important. And I also wanted to mention Iowa Vets Home in Marshalltown. They provide veterans and their spouses with some services. They have assisted living, they have nursing facility, they have a variety of levels of care for veterans as well. I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to kind of breeze through these resident rights. I often, when I'm talking with residents, ask them about their rights, and they often say, I didn't even know I had any rights, which is really sad. Of course you have rights. So everyone, of course, has the right to make a grievance or recommend changes in policies, and I would certainly encourage and empower anybody to do that. Or feel free to call me and we can talk about it. Residents should be kept informed of issues or decisions that would affect them. And the facility is required to post the address and phone number for the Ombudsman advocate, which is our office, the survey agency, and the law enforcement as well. So here are quick resident rights. Of course, right to be treated with dignity and respect, right to participate in your care and the care planning, decide when to live, how to live, including when to go to bed, when to get up, what to eat. Those kinds of day-to-day choices should still be a resident's right to make. These are all pretty standard. I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of time. So I have had folks ask, would there ever be a situation where I'd be asked to move out of the facility? And there might be a situation like that, but only for these reasons. First one, medical reasons. Maybe if the facility feels they can't meet the residents' needs anymore. If there's welfare, maybe the resident's aggressive towards others or suicidal. They might decide they can't meet their needs, or for non-payment. So those would really be the only reasons that a facility can discharge someone. I have residents and family members call and say, well, I don't want them to kick me out if we're making complaints. And rest assured, that's not a legal reason that they can discharge somebody. If you find yourself faced with an involuntary discharge, which is a letter, either 30-day letter usually, that says you need to leave this facility within 30 days, please contact our office. As I mentioned before, we are required by law to receive a copy of these discharge letters. And in response, we do obtain the phone number for the caregiver, and we'll reach out to you to talk to you about your appeal rights, obtaining legal representation. And if that's not an option, we can work with you to put together a plan for the appeal process. So please know you have a helper in us, and you're welcome to call us too if you encounter the situation. So here I put together a couple questions to ask. To ask about activities. What do those look like? Do you do outings? Can residents bring in their belongings? Are there any protective measures for residents who might be at risk for wandering outside of the facility? Lots of places have wander guards, which are special like bracelets that might go around their hand and trigger an alarm if someone would get too close to the front door. So you can ask in case that might be a concern. Asking about resident directed care. Is input welcome from the resident? And the answer had better be yes, it's supposed to be. Are residents invited to their care plans? And ask around too, from people and friends in the community, find out if they have any input or recommendations or even experience with different facilities, because all information is helpful when you're making this choice. So as far as payment, private pay, long-term care insurance, Medicaid, which is a state plan, Medicare, but only usually for short term and usually after a qualifying hospital stay. So usually that's just for a short period of time. The VA doesn't typically pay for nursing home care, but for veterans who have service-connected disabilities, there might be an option for them to pay towards long-term care costs. And I've got a number here for the VA if you would like to call and find out if you would qualify. Big questions to ask a facility: costs. Are there extra fees? If you have a long-term care policy, can they help you with submitting the bills for reimbursement? Do they accept Medicare and Medicaid? Not all places do. And even if you don't have enough to pay privately when you first move in, is that still an option to move in even as you're applying for Medicaid? So I have another very long, comprehensive nursing facility checklist on our website, which you're welcome to check out. All kinds of questions on there just to get your thoughts going as you're considering making a move if that's necessary. So if you have questions on the road to looking into long-term care, please feel free to contact my office. I have our phone number here. Medicare Nursing Home Compare, they've got a great website with a 5-star rating system. I think that's just one piece of the puzzle to take into consideration. I'd certainly encourage reading inspection reports from the regulatory folks, which is Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals. And Iowa Legal Aid also has some great tips and ideas and suggestions for when you're considering a long-term care setting. And that does it for me. Thank you.
I do have a question for you, Pam, that came up from one of the viewers. Is there anything happening in Iowa to support paid caregiving in the home?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I wasn't sure about that either.
You guys know about the, are they talking about the CDAC program maybe?
I don't know about any program. It just says, is there anything happening in Iowa to support paid caregiving in home? In the home.
Okay, so sometimes if you qualify for Medicaid, if your person does that you're caring for, there's something called the CDAC program through the Department of Human Services that you can apply for as an adult child. I don't think you can be a spouse, but you can apply then to be paid to help someone in the home. But then you can't utilize resources like where Karen works, where like paid assistance would be able to come in.
Right.
So I think the Department of Human Services would be the person to talk to about that.
Thanks for answering that.
Thanks.
That's the only question that has come through since you were talking, Pam. Thanks for jumping in, Abby, and helping with that too. Anyway, great information today. A lot of helpful information, and it's hard to get through all of that in an hour. So the good news is that this will be on the website, the Heritage Agency on Aging website under the Caregiver Wellness Day. So you can go on there, learn more about Pam and Abby, and click on this whole page to learn more about see the whole thing again. I do want to announce that our next webinar will be on November 10th. Also at 1 o'clock, and our guest speaker will be Lori Hogan, and she will be talking about stories learned as a caregiver. She is the co-founder of Home Instead Senior Care, so I know her very well. So she will be our main speaker for November 10th at 1 o'clock. So I welcome you all back in November to join us then. I want to thank both Pam and Abby for sharing your time with us today, and for everybody spending the hour with us and watching us in this new format for 2020 Zoom webinars. We're getting really good at this technology stuff. So thank you again. And any questions you have about anything that we've discussed in any of our webinars, you can reach out to the Heritage Agency on Aging. The number is 319-398-5559, or you can reach out to Abby at the Family Caregiver Center, or Pam at the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's office. So thank you again, ladies, for sharing your information today. Have a great rest of the month, and we hope to see you next month in November on the 10th for our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.